Hello everyone, here's a new educational chess game. My opponent starts with the pawn to d4, and I'll respond with the pawn to d5. My opponent is rated 1639 ELO points. Knight to c3 is played, which attacks d5, but as a result my opponent deprives himself of the c2 pawn because the c2 pawn is blocked. It won't be able to go to c4 to attack the center, nor even to c3 to defend the center. Whereas my c7 pawn will be able to go to c5 to attack his center. But I'll start with knight to f6 to defend the pawn on d5 and look to play c5. That's it. He plays bishop to f4. And his idea after c5 is perhaps to coordinate his bishop and knight to come to b5 for forks on c7 supported by the bishop. Nevertheless, it doesn't work after c5 knight to b5 because I have the move queen to a5 check, which will force his knight back to c3 if he doesn't want to lose it. So I can play the move to c5. Now that he plays e3, I have to be careful because he's really threatening knight to b5, since after queen to a5 check, he can play c3 as the bishop protects the knight, and he'll still threaten to enter on c7. So I can block with knight to a6. But if, for example, I play knight to c6 here, knight to b5 is going to be a big problem for me with a fork on c7, which I won't be able to block. So I can simply play a6 to prevent the knight from coming to b5. And that's what I'm going to do. I play a6. And the idea now is to play knight to c6 to increase the pressure on d4. If he takes on c5, I think I'll play knight to c6. That allows me to prevent him from consolidating his pawn with the b4 push, and it will let me play e5. He plays knight to f3, so I play knight to c6. If he captures on c5, I can play e6, and my bishop will recover the c5 pawn afterwards. So my aim is still to divert his pawn from the center to the side, so that it loses central influence. For now, he refuses. He's holding on to the d4 pawn. And there it is. He finally takes on c5. So I'm going to play the pawn to e6, to recover the pawn on c5. You see, on b4, there's a knight that takes. And after bishop to d6, there will simply be an exchange on d6, and I get my pawn back each time. Now, she's probably going to castle, and I'll castle as well. So I have an extra central pawn. I think she'll try to play e4 to attack my center. She plays knight to e5. So why is she playing that? I don't know. I'm gonna play bishop to d6 to attack the knight twice. If he takes on c6, I'll take back. If he takes on d6, I'll take back, and I still have better control of the center. And anyway, my bishop on c5 wasn't doing anything, it was just aiming at the d3 pawn, which was too well defended. Might as well reposition it on d6 to put pressure on e5. Obviously, I'd like to regain control of the e5 square, so I can push my own pawn to e5, activate my central majority, and free up the bishop on c8. He plays knight to g4. So here, it's interesting because I think I can win some material, although that's not certain actually. If I take his knight on g4, he recaptures with the queen. I have this e5 push that allows me to attack his queen and his bishop. But his queen can move over to h5 to attack h7 and try to checkmate. You see, after knight takes g4, queen takes g4, e5, he's going to move his queen to attack h7. But if he plays queen to h5, I could play g6, attack his queen, and his bishop would still be under attack. So after knight takes g4, queen takes g4, e5, he could come to h4. But then I could take his queen, so no, his idea doesn't work. Unless after knight takes g4, he thought about playing bishop to d6 first. And when I recapture with the queen, he then takes back on g4. But well, it's not a big deal, I'm going to do it anyway. So here, if he doesn't want to lose the piece, he takes the bishop on d6 first, and only then try to recapture the knight. So bishop takes, queen takes, there you go, that's what's happening. So do I immediately recapture his bishop, or do I have an interesting move? For example, I could play knight takes e3, attacking his queen. But his queen will come to h5, still threatening mate on h7. Alright, I'll just calmly recapture on d6 with the queen. He takes on g4. He still wants to attack here, of course attacking h7. That's what he's been aiming for all along. But now, I can play e5, I free my bishop, I activate my center, and I can always play the e4 push to drive his bishop back. There you go. He's threatening queen takes h7. That's really all he's playing for, actually. If that's already helped him win games, why not? So I push e4. He puts his bishop on e2, and now I have a backward pawn on d5. He's going to try to play rook to d1 and attack that backward pawn. And also, when he plays rook to d1, it's not just about attacking d5. He's also threatening knight takes e4, since my pawn will be pinned, so that's annoying. Here I'm looking at pushing f5 to also push f4 and try to attack his king side. But after the f5 push, there will be rook to d1. This time the f-pawn will defend e4. f5, rook to d1, bishop to e6. He can always play bishop to c4 to keep putting pressure on the pinned pawn. Alright, I'll play bishop to e6 right away, defend d5, and maybe look for moves like queen to d4 to counterattack a bit on the queen side, since his queen side is a bit neglected. His queen is on the other side. Here, he's threatening knight takes pawn, but if I play queen to b4, I'll defend here. But on queen to b4, he's going to take on d5, but I'll take on b2. And after that, I don't think he has any really troublesome checks. Let's go with queen to b4. We'll counterattack a bit in his position. We'll show him that we too are capable of creating pressure. So he's able to win d5 and e4, but I think I can win b2 and a2 and thus get a distant pass pawn, the a pawn. He takes d5. So what do I exchange first? Number. I can take on b2, but he has that fork on c7, which will mess up my structure a bit, so I'll take first anyway, right? And in this position, we're fighting with a knight against a light squared bishop, and he's going to want to attack this weakness. You see, he's going to want to play bishop to d3 to always attack this weakness. I play g6 and rook to h5, and I won't be able to take. I'll take on a2, and after bishop to d3, g6, rook to h5, I must not take his rook. So he might also want to weaken my king's defenses with h4, h5. He plays rook to h5, you see. He's quite predictable. So here, what is threatening, rook takes, king takes, there's not really a threat. But if his queen is no longer on the diagonal, I could take his rook. So I could try to attack his queen, for example, by playing rook to e8, but then he'll play queen to g4 to pin my g-pawn like that. And if I push f5, he can play queen to g3. Of course, I can't play f5, because there's bishop to c4, a fork. It attacks my king and attacks my queen. But after rook to e8, queen to g4, I have the move knight to e5, which is very strong. Alright, let's play rook to e8. Maybe I should have used the other rook, but I want to keep this rook to support the advance of the a-pawn, the passed pawn. But you see, if he puts pressure on f7 with his queen, for example with queen to f4, he'll also threaten moves like bishop to c4, which will attack my queen and the pawn on f7. So putting this rook on e8 weakens my defenses on f7. But fortunately I'm counting on the move knight to e5. Knight to e5, he can sacrifice his rook, I take back, it's not too much of a problem. And with knight to e5, I attack his queen, I attack his bishop, and if his queen is no longer on the file, I could take his rook. Well, I still need to be careful, because sometimes you take the rook and end up with a perpetual check, because I can't get the king to safety behind. So I don't know if I'll take the rook, I'll have to see, of course. So for now, he's attacking with his bishop, his rook, and his queen working together. But if I manage to defuse this attack, I have this distant passed pawn on a, which will win me the game, and I can push it with the rook behind. So he moved to g3. I'm going to take his bishop. And now it's actually two connected passed pawns that are going to advance. A move like queen to e2 is interesting because I attack his rook and his pawn. But after queen to e2, he's able to play rook to d5 to defend. Maybe just simply push the pawn forward. What is he going to try to do? f4, f5, that's what he's going to try to do. But even that, well, okay, afterwards he'll take, and that will open up the rook's file. That could be dangerous. But as soon as he plays f4, he'll weaken the e3 pawn, and I could play queen to e2 to attack his rook and threaten captures on e3 with my rook and queen. So I can play a 5. So I play a 5. I have a clear plan, which is to push the pawn forward. And the further up it goes, the more dangerous it becomes. So now he plays rook to f5. I still don't see what he's trying to do. I don't understand. Of course, I can't take his rook. If I don't take it, what happens? Nothing actually happens, right? So I push my pawn forward. He wanted to free up his h-pawn, so he wants to play h5. I can play queen to e2, which attacks the d3 pawn and clears the way for my own pawn. What's interesting about queen to e2 is that when my pawn reaches a2, I could sacrifice my queen for his rook to promote to a queen with check and gain a tempo. Queen to e2, he'll play h5, I play a3, he'll take on g6, I'll recapture, and nothing happens. Maybe he played rook to g5 to try to sacrifice, but I could play king to g7. Alright, I'll play queen to e2. I'm also attacking the d3 pawn because I might also want to take his rook that way. So you see, you have to find a balance between defense and counterplay. For me, the counterplay is secured on the queen side with the passed pawn. And he's been betting everything on attacking my king this whole time. With his attacking battery of bishop and queen, I managed to get rid of his bishop, and now with the pawn. So he plays h5. I think I'll just play queen takes d3. That attacks his rook. And see, even if I play rook to g5 now, the queen defends g6. So if he takes, I take, and there won't be any sacrifices on g6 with his rook. There's no follow-up against my king, and my pawn will be able to keep advancing. He plays rook to f6, so he has saved his rook. I'm also considering the danger of h6, because he might want to push that pawn to control the g7 square, and at some point try to get in with his queen to checkmate. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work because the queen doesn't have access to the e5 square, which would allow her to get to g7. So I can push my pawn to a3. If he takes, I can simply recapture. The queen defends. There wouldn't be a rook sacrifice, because if he could sacrifice his rook, he would at least have a perpetual check afterwards. He could force a draw, but here that's not possible. I play a 3. As soon as my pawn reaches a 2, I can sacrifice my queen for his rook, promote to a new queen, and I'll have an extra rook. Here, I'll recapture with the h-pawn to keep the f-pawn defending this diagonal, even though there aren't really any major problems. He comes to d6, attacking my queen, and now he wants my queen to move away from protecting the g6 pawn so he can sacrifice afterwards. You see? But fortunately, I have the e4 square or the f5 square. If I sacrifice the queen for his rook, I play 2. He can't prevent me from queening again, unless he sacrifices his rook, and then I'll have 2 rooks for the queen. But the problem after queen takes, king takes, a 2, is that he can also play rook takes, g6, and at least find a draw. After pawn takes, queen takes, he'll keep checking my king non-stop. So I think I'll go to f5. But I can go to e4 because if he pushes f3, I can play queen takes e3 check, and only then come back to defend. Yes, I'll go to e4. I'm actually going to encourage him to play f3, because what he wants is for my queen to lose connection with the g6 pawn, so he can sacrifice his rook and at least get a draw. And now I'm only 2 squares away from being able to promote to a new queen. So he plays rook to d7. What is he trying to do? I don't see it. There's no interesting sacrifice, so the pawn keeps advancing. And now he's completely helpless against this pawn. So he plays rook to a1 to try to block the pawn's advance, but I can play queen to b1, check. But what bothers me isn't taking everything back, because I recapture by promoting to a queen. After queen to b1 check, what bothers me is king to h2. And if I take his rook well, he no longer has the rook on d6. Otherwise, he could have tried rook takes g6 to try to sacrifice and find a perpetual, but no, that wouldn't even work. Because after queen takes, my queen could come back to defend. So here, he really can't do anything. I'm going to play queen to b1 check. He takes, I recapture making a queen, and up until now, he was the one creating mating threats, but now it's going to be me creating them. So I can play rook to a 1 to threaten queen to h1 mate. I could also play king to g7 to let the rook slide over to the h file, to the 8th rank. I think I'm going to play king to g7. I find it quite elegant, this little king move to open up the secret passage, the 8th rank, to go attack the king like that on the h file. So he plays queen to c7, freeing an escape square for his king and attacking f7. And it's true that after rook to h8, check he goes to g3 and I don't have a check. Well, it's not a big deal, I could defend the pawn on f7, but I'm still going to give him this check and then probably come to f5 to protect the pawn on f7 and keep attacking his king. I didn't see any special mate, so I'm going back to defend. How can I provoke a quick mate? Here, I don't know. I'd need to involve my rook, maybe rook to f4 and then rook to g4 mate. He's a player who believes in his chances until the very end, despite being down a rook, despite the fact that his king no longer has any shelter. He comes to b7, he puts pressure on this rook does. He threaten anything? He's threatening queen to b2 check, right? But now he no longer controls that square, so I can go give a check. I'll give a check if he plays f4, I can capture on e3 with check. Of course, I'm well aware that my queen no longer defends the pawn on f7, and that I have to keep giving checks non-stop. He goes there, I'm going to play queen to h5 check, try to provoke g4 so I can come in on h3 afterwards. It's a king hunt. I just hope this king doesn't keep slipping away from me like an eel that finally escapes your grasp. So he plays g4, so queen to h3 check. If he goes to e2, I take on g4 with check. If he goes to f4, we'll see what I can do. I'm looking at moves like g5 check or rook to f4 check. If he goes to e4, I can simply take with check. So if he goes to f4, that's the interesting line. No, he doesn't go to f4. So I take with check. I'm going to give him another check here to secure the protection of the f-pawn and attack f2. And then the rook will start attacking his king, especially if he comes to the second rank rook check, and after that we can try to take his pawn or find a mate on the first rank. He comes here. We're going to check him like this, so that if he moves to the b file, he'll get hit with rook to b8. I have to be careful though, because I don't have much time left. There's a 3-second increment, but I really don't have much time. So now I trade rooks to be able to bring the rook back here, and with this deadly pin, his queen is lost. He could resign, but he doesn't because he sees I don't have much time left. Obviously with a queen it's easy to win, but for those of you who are less experienced, it might be interesting to see the technique. Alright, I'm just going to bring my king closer. If he pushes the pawn, I'll take on f4 with check. Not with check, but with a pin. Here, I just need to bring my queen closer to restrict his space. Now I bring my king closer. I need my king to help me. If he goes to f2, I can play queen f3 check, for example. He comes here, so I bring my king closer. The only thing you need to watch out for when you have a completely winning endgame is to avoid the risk of stalemate. But here, there's no stalemate since he still has the f-pawn that can move. Alright, so is there an immediate mate? I don't see one, so I'll take on e3. It's not a stalemate because in any case he can push his pawn and he has a square to move to. So here, I'm going to place the queen to control the second rank so that the king can't escape anymore, restricting his space, and then I'll need to bring my king closer to put the queen in front of his king and deliver checkmate. You see this king on a 1, we play king to c3, and if he comes back to b1, queen to b2 is mate. And if he pushes the pawn, there will still be queen to b2, checkmate. That's how you proceed with the queen when your opponent has nothing left. And now she just resigned. Now look at the computer's accuracy score. I have 90% compared to 85% for my opponent. But most importantly, my opponent had a combination that could have saved him. Let's see if you can find it. So he starts with d4, I play d5, he plays knight to c3, knight to f6, and bishop to f4. I think this is called the London System Jobava variation, because it's the chess player Jobava who introduced this knight to c3 move with the bishop on f4. Usually when you play d4 and bishop to f4, you're in the London system. And with the knight coming out, instead of playing e3 and c3, but bringing out the knight, that's called the Jobava variation. I've never really faced it before, so this is going to be interesting. I play c5 here, attacking the central pawn, and he plays e3. And here I'm still wary of the knight coming to b5, with ideas of a fork on c7, you know, the knight attacking the king and the rook. So I play a6 to prevent the knight from coming to b5. He plays knight to f3. Now I play knight to c6, he takes on c5, and I play e6 so that the bishop can recapture the pawn on c5. He plays bishop to d3, I take on c5, kingside castle, and here he could have easily equalized the position by playing e4, attacking my center. He's well defended to push the pawn to e4. On the other hand, the position is simply equal, so it's not a bad result for me with black in the opening to be able to equalize in less than 10 moves. But he doesn't play e4, he plays knight to e5. So I decided to play bishop to d6. And then he puts his knight on g4. I thought for a long time, and it's a mistake to put the knight on g4, but I won't follow up with the correct sequence all the way through. I take on g4, that's the best decision. He takes on d6, and then I recaptured with the queen. Although I thought for a long time about the possibility of taking on e3, and I didn't dare to take on e3. In reality, I should have taken on e3 first. But why didn't I dare to do it? Because after knight takes e3, I was afraid of the queen coming in to attack h7, thinking that my knight is still in danger, my rook is still in danger, and if I play g6, the queen infiltrates on h6, attacking the rook. So the computer says you have to take the rook here, that the bishop will take there threatening mat, that you can recapture with the queen, and in the end, the queens will be exchanged so that white recovers, and black is a pawn up, it's true. But the line is quite long, and I had some uncertainties in this variation, especially about playing g6, opening up the dark squares when he has the dark squared bishop. Maybe also about the fact that he could take the knight to open the file for his rook as well. All of that didn't seem so clear to me during the game, and you know in this line it only takes missing one move to end up in a bad position. But it was still the right move. I should have taken on e3. I thought about it, but I didn't dare. I took on d6, he took on g4, and that allows this queen to get into my kingside anyway. I play e5, the center, freeing the bishop which attacks his queen. He plays h4. For a long time, he's going to try to checkmate me. So I play e4, pushing back the bishop, which moves to e2. I go to e6, he goes to d1. And here the computer tells me that queen to e5 is the normal continuation. But I move my queen away to b4. And the computer starts to give an advantage to white. Why? We're going to trade pawns. He's going to win the d5 pawn, then the e4 pawn. I'm going to win the b2 and a2 pawns and get the passed a pawn. I wanted to find a bit of counterplay on the other side, but there was a move I missed. Let's take a look. Knight takes d5, bishop takes, rook takes d5, queen takes b2, queen takes a 4, queen takes a 2. And my opponent is going to play the logical move, bishop to d3. We expect him to play bishop to d3 to properly defend c2 and put pressure on h7. But actually that wasn't the best move. The best move for white was actually to play bishop to c4, attacking the queen, and instead of trying to find mate on h7, which doesn't work, to start putting pressure on f7. For example, after queen to b2, playing rook to d7, we have double pressure on f7 and pressure on b7. And the computer thinks that this position is slightly in white's favor, even though the best move for black is queen to e5, trying to offer a queen exchange. If taken, black recaptures with the knight to create forks. So in reality, white shouldn't take. Instead, they should play bishop to d5. And after that, it's just a small advantage for white. But it's true that I hadn't seen this idea of bishop to c4. In the game, he plays bishop to d3. He's a bit more direct. He wants to checkmate on h7, except it doesn't work. g6, rook to h5, of course, you shouldn't take the rook. So I attack his queen. He moves to g4. I play knight to e5 to try to relieve the pressure, to take away his light squared bishop. That's what happens. Knight takes, pawn takes, and now I push the pawn to f5. He plays rook to f5. I didn't understand his idea at first, but actually he wants to free the h-pawn so it can come to f5. But there's another idea behind rook to f5, and I didn't spot it. But luckily for me, neither did my opponent. Here I play f4, he plays h4, and I should have played queen to b3 to free up the a-pawn and attack the d3 pawn. But instead, I went to e2. That's a mistake. And why is it a mistake? Queen to e2, and suddenly look at the evaluation bar, it goes back to equal, even though there was a huge advantage for black. This move, queen to e2, is a mistake, but why? I invite you to pause the video and try to figure out why I made this mistake. What did you come up with? Well, I left the pawn on f7 unprotected, and during the game, I was really focused on sacrifices on g6, especially when there was a pawn on h1 and the rook on g5. I was afraid of sacrifices on g6 that could lead to a perpetual check. And here, I didn't see that there was a sacrifice on f7 that could also give him a perpetual check. And that's why I should have played queen to b3 to keep the protection of f7. And then my opponent has no follow-up, and I can keep winning as in the game. But I played queen to e2, and there, he didn't see it. He played the pawn to h5. He should have played rook takes f7. And that's terrible for me, because after king takes, I can't manage to hide my king from his queen. It's impossible. He's going to play queen f4 check, and I have no safe shelter. Wherever I go, I get attacked. If I go to g7, queen c7 check, if I try to go up, the queen comes in. I can't even go up to h5 anymore because I get checkmated. I'll have to go back down, but queen c7 check. I can go to a white square, but queen c4 check. I can go to f8, but queen f4 check, king g7, queen d4 check, king g8, queen d5 check, king h8, queen d4, there's no hiding place for my king. Even though I have both rooks here and two pawns, I can't hide my king from his queen, and it's going to be a perpetual check, so it'll be a draw. Fortunately for me, after queen e2, he doesn't see it, he plays a 5. I play queen takes d3, and now the sacrifice doesn't work anymore because after rook takes, king takes, if he plays queen f4 check, I can bring my queen back. And with my queen's protection, I'll be able to block the checks to my king. So now, his sacrifice doesn't work anymore. He missed his chance. He played rook to f6. I play pawn to f3. He takes on g6. I recapture with the h-pawn. He played rook to d6. He's attacking my queen. I played queen to d4 here. He plays rook to d7. I play pawn to a2, rook to a1, queen to b1 check. So now, he's to take rook takes, pawn takes. And now, it's over. King to h2, there are several ways to win. Well, I decided to play king to g7. Queen to c7, he's attacking f7, but rook to h8 check, king to g3. We come back to defend. He takes the pawn on b7, queen to e5 check, king to f3, queen to h5 check. I wanted to provoke the advance of the g-pawn. Queen check, he went to e4, queen takes g4 check, king to d3, queen to f5 check. He goes to c4. So here, I give a check on the c-file. He plays rook to c7, I exchange, and then play rook to c8 to pin his queen with the support of my queen. But actually, I could have played queen to c2 and captured his queen while keeping my rook. And after that, of course, it's easy to win. Well, there you go. I hope this was an interesting video. I was under a lot of pressure on the wing from his attacking trio of queen, rook, and bishop. Then, since I had taken out his bishop, he pushed his h-pawn. He still could have saved himself with a sacrifice on f7 when I wasn't paying attention. I was only watching out for the sacrifice on g6. You can leave me likes, comments, share the video, and we'll meet again soon for new adventures. Goodbye everyone.